This is a story called The Real Fixer-Upper. About 5 years ago, my husband Adam and I decided it was finally time to start looking to purchase a house. We had always talked about buying an older, fixer-upper home because we've had the idea that they hold more charm and character. Plus, we can appreciate a place that has its own quirks, and we love the thought of turning something run down into something beautiful again. With that being said, I grew up in a pretty rural farming town in Indiana that had more than its fair share of rundown houses. The surrounding areas had started to boom a little bit, with farmland being sold off and turned into new factory locations, along with new subdivisions for the people coming to work for them. I thought it'd be a great place to start our house hunt. I figured we'd be a lot closer to civilization than I used to be growing up, but not so much that we'd be living a stone throw away from our neighbors. Adam and I decided to take a drive one summer Sunday afternoon, so I could show him some of the backwoods of my hometown, and to also see what some of the properties we checked out online looked like in person. As we were turning off the main road through town and further onto a more secluded country road, we noticed that the very first house on our left was completely abandoned. We pulled into a small patch of the yard where the grass was the shortest, and where a gravel driveway used to be. To further investigate, it was painted a deep green color, which made it almost invisible against the tall grass, sticker bushes, and weeds that had grown up around it. There was a massive tree in the front yard whose branches and leaves helped to camouflage this place even further. The house looked as if it were at least 100 years old. It looked like it had sat empty for years. It looked neglected, weather-worn, and in need of major love. In that moment, it was perfect. There was nothing but woods across the street and no neighboring houses in sight, so Adam and I thought it probably wouldn't hurt if we just trespassed a little. I completely justified my reasoning by thinking, well, we're interested in buying the property. We're not here to cause trouble. We're doing someone a favor. We could take this burden of a house off that someone's hands. We just need to take a look around first, that's all. Plus, there weren't any no trespassing signs anywhere. So I was perfectly armed with my newfound inflated ignorance and arrogance to assess this property. We walked carefully through the bush towards the left side of the house, where we noticed a well that was still standing, complete with bucket, rope, handle, and the original overhang. My excitement went for a picturesque country house was building. Directly across from the well, there was a side entrance into the house through what looked like an old added-on mudroom. The screen door to the mudroom was closed. However, there was a wooden door behind it that was half open. This was our not really intrusive because we aren't breaking anything to get in way in. It was probably in the mid-90s outside that day. So when we entered, Adam first, of course, we were met with thick, stifling heat. The kind that holds so much humidity that it almost takes your breath away. What we thought was a mudroom was an extended pantry area or canning kitchen. It was teeny with one window, an old rusted sink, a small stove, and the walls still held shelves upon shelves of canned and spoiled vegetables in jars. I remember thinking, oh yeah, this'll be great. I totally remember how to can, and we can have a garden, and insert all kinds of other giddy thoughts women have while in the throes of house hunting here. It also had the doorway into the main part of the house, and this is where my elation came to an end. Through the doorway was the kitchen. What remained of the cabinets and sink were against the wall on the left, but they were either broken or hanging on for dear life, or both. The kitchen connected to a wide open living area, with one side having walls streaked with black that led up to the half-sunken gray ceiling. There had been a fire at some point. The windows on the wall were all filthy, covered in dust or ash that made the room much darker than it should have been in the middle of the day. My heart sank. I knew we wouldn't be able to afford a costly repair of a house fire, but I kept that disappointing thought to myself. The open living area had not one stitch of furniture, save for one small wooden rocking horse that a child would have. The floor was littered with magazines, as if someone had a giant stack of them and just threw them up in the air to see where they'd land. Curious as to what the former owners liked in regards to reading material, I decided to check them out. Almost every single magazine was related to dolls in some way. Porcelain doll collecting, Barbie dolls, making dolls by hand, clothing for dolls. I felt a little creeped out by it, especially under the surveillance of the rocking horse's dead, painted-on stare. But I figured that an old lady must have lived in the house before, and I created a self-medicating idea that her husband probably died, and this was the only hobby she had to pass her time. We decided to check out another room that was connected to the half-burned living area. Through the doorway to the left was a weird combination of molded, standing-up shower with handicapped handles, an assisted toilet next to it divided down the middle by a wall. On the right was a well made entirely of built-in bookshelves. The shelves were full of paperwork, manila envelopes, books, and even more magazines. It struck us as a pretty weird setup, but thought these people must really love to read while sitting on the toilet. My husband and I thought we could find out whose previous homeowners were, since some of the paperwork on top of the stack seemed to be old bills. If we wanted to look up property records, at least now we would have a name to go on. I grabbed a stack of papers and began to flip through them. When about halfway through, that changed from being old telephone bills to printed out color pictures of the internet of porcelain dolls. I put the stack of papers back on the shelf and picked up a small red 5-star notebook. I started from the beginning, casually leafing through and seeing daily entries of medications taken, blood pressure, glucose measurements written in the next hand. About 20 pages in, the entries started to change entirely. They became crude drawings of twisted faces, done in red ink. The faces had horns or bloody fangs. Then full-on drawings of devils appeared in the pages after. I wanted to believe that the child had picked this up to doodle in, but I felt like this was something much different than that. After the drawings, the notebook became someone's personal journal, written in what I assume was an elderly man's cursive. It told of how he knew he was coming towards the end of his life, and how he remembered being just a young boy when his mother passed away. He described in detail how the wake for his mother was held in the front room of this house, and how during those nights he crawled on the top of his mother's body in her coffin to sleep. I couldn't believe what I was reading. Even though I had been sweating from the thickness in the air, a sudden rush of goosebumps came over me. I immediately showed it to Adam, flipping to the pages of devils and snarled faces, and then read, aloud, this stranger's memories of his mother, just to see if it was the same the second time around. After I finished, he said, "Well, this just got a whole lot weirder," nodding to what he held in his hands. While I was reading the notebook, he had continued rifling through the mountains of papers. One stack not only had more printed pictures of dolls, but now they contained pictures of real women in torture bondage, ball gags, or electrical tape placed over their mouths, jumper cables twisting their nipples, being hog-tied with rope. Sometimes there was more than one woman in the picture. It felt as if a brick had been tossed into my stomach. For some, those images wouldn't be disturbing. But in the context of our visit, my panic started to grow. I was torn between wanting to find out more and getting the fuck out. Adam reassured me that while it was on the creepy side, it wasn't anything to necessarily lose my shit over, since the woman didn't seem to be suffering or bleeding. The burned-out living area was separated from the rest of the house by a staircase. The staircase had a room directly across from it, and a small hallway on the other side that led to the main room at the front of the house. We debated on going up the second floor, but decided against, since it already felt as if we were roasting in an oven and were unsure of the stability of the second story. Going into the room across from the staircase, we noted a few more doll magazines on the floor, but not near the number as the other room held. There were scattered plastic doll pieces here and there, random arms and heads. To the left was the original fireplace with a couple teeny vases on the mantel. Smack dab in the middle was a framed picture of an elderly couple, smiling and happy. These certainly weren't the type of people that would have pictures of women bound and gagged hidden away in their bathroom. These people could have been my grandparents, I thought to myself. To the right was a big bay window, and smack dab in the middle was a yellowed piece of paper with faded black painted handwriting on it. It was for anyone on the outside of the house to see before it became overgrown. Reading it backwards from inside, it said, "If you're here to talk about Jesus, go away." "That's kind of hilarious," Adam said after reading it for himself. "Yeah, it kind of is," I half chuckled. But something in my brain was now starting to nag me even more. Something wasn't computing correctly for me. Thinking back, my mind was putting together that the elderly couple in this town more than likely be pretty religious. And by the super small chance that they weren't, it would have been gossiped about had someone seen that in the window. It was as if the house had held two very different personalities within. I told my husband that I just wanted to go into the one last room down the little hallway, and then I would be very ready to leave. Going down the small hallway, it became darker and cooler. It was relief from the oppressive heat that I'd been dealing with since first stepping inside. The shade from the giant tree in the front yard had blocked out a lot of the sunlight, making it about 20 degrees cooler. But we soon realized that wasn't the only reason this part of the house's temperature was much more tolerable. Rounding the corner into the last room, it took a few seconds for our eyes to adjust to the difference in light. But the change of the air was noticeably immediate. It was as if we had stepped into a cave. The smell was dank and left a dampness on our skin. Once things came into clear focus, that's when we saw it. The main reason our senses had shifted so quickly. The large hole in the floor. At first we thought that perhaps the wooden floor was so weak that it had simply caved in on its own, and that the roof had leaked and caused the exact area of the floor to rot away. But upon getting closer, it became obvious this wasn't the case. The hole was about 5 feet across and went straight down into the earth, with about 2 feet of space between the remaining floor and the dirt. This hole was there because it was made to be there. My husband and I looked at each other. My heart was racing so fast that I thought it would burst through my chest. I said aloud to him while pointing, "What the fuck is this? Why is this here?" I panicked. My breathing became more rapid and shallow. Nothing was making sense, and yet the thoughts that had been running in the background of my brain were all coming together like a jigsaw puzzle. Then we saw them. The worn and faded social security cards, a few old and molded over driver's licenses just thrown around haphazardly. Checkbooks, credit cards, as if someone had emptied their purse or wallet in this room and then just disappeared into the hole. It was overcome with terror and dread. I had to get out of this house. My skin felt like static, as if my whole body had been taken over by the sensation of when your foot falls asleep. I had tears forming in my eyes, and my mind just told me to run. Without having to speak, Adam quickly took me by my arm and led us back down the hallway, through the burned-out living room and kitchen, out the side canning room, and back out into the light of day. We ran back down the mangled and tangled driveway to the car. Remembering back, I get that eerie feeling that we weren't the only people in the house that day, alive or dead. As a side note, the house still stands. We never called the police to report us breaking into the house and finding a giant hole in the floor. However, we drove past it about a year later, and a large tree in the front yard had all its branches removed. All the windows had been boarded shut, and after doing some research, found out that the land it sits on is for sale. The house itself has been condemned. Thank you for listening. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe.